Okay, once again, good morning, everyone. For this particular session, we're gonna discuss the unit number 3, titled as Human Rights and the Law. So, human rights class, it refers to the fundamental principles that protect the dignity, freedoms, and rights of every individual. In the Philippine legal system class, obviously, these human rights play a very significant role in ensuring fair and equal treatment for all citizens under the law. Because without these human rights, the instrumentalities of the government and other agencies could possibly impose a lot of abuses. And it is part of the law of the land class, a universal law that each born individual would be granted with his human rights. So human rights are inherent, of course, to all of us, regardless of our nationality, race, sex, socioeconomic status, abilities, the color of our skin, the opinions that we have, the worldviews that we are inclined on. Again, these are inherently granted to all of us because human rights are universal and inalienable. What does that mean, class? It underscores that these human rights, these constitutional rights cannot be cannot be surrendered or cannot be taken away from us. There can be no law to be made or enacted that take away a particular constitutional right or any human right as determined. Okay? And talking about the applicability of this human rights class, it is applicable to everyone, to everywhere, and at all times. Meaning it is omnipresent. Okay? Regardless of wherever we go, these human rights are granted to us. Though we acknowledge the locality of, of provisions of the law applicable to the jurisdiction of a particular country, but talking about human rights, these are again referring to universal and inalienable rights. Class. And these are the following categories of human rights. We have the civil and political rights. Examples of these are the right to free speech, the fair trial, the fair criticism that we could possibly give to any government employee or official. Take note of this, that we are having this right to criticize, okay, public figure, the public official. For example, the way the Marcos administration has dealt with the recent Typhoon Christine class, if you notice that there are thousands of people who actually badly need the help. And during the press conference, did you watch it, class? The press conference of PBBM? Okay. I have noticed the following. First, he said that, we have this problem with flooding. Obviously, class, flood, it is expected to happen during typhoons, right? Especially for super typhoon like Christine. But again, it seems to be that there were no proactive measures done by the administration. So we can express our frustration. We can express our criticism against the government, against these public officials who are not actually dealing properly these recent calamities that strike to our country, class. And there are thousands of people in Camarines Sur, in Bicol region who are deeply in excruciating pain right now due to the incompetence of this government that has been showing with this typhoon. And worse, class, because this Bicol region, based on the zona of PBBM, he was mentioning that there was a 9 point something billion pesos allocated and spent in year 2023 for flood control project. And yet, obviously, what we have seen right now is the exact opposite of what he was narrating and telling before the Filipino people. So we all have the right to question, to investigate, to ventilate our concerns as to how was the money spent, what particular areas where flood control projects were actually built, and so on and so forth. Okay? So for number 2 class, it refers to, another category of human rights, the economic, social, and cultural rights. This means we all have the right to work. We cannot be denied our application to a particular private company or public entity so long as we are qualified, because each company also and the government is given the management prerogative to create and publish whatever qualifications that they think best fit with a particular position in the government class, okay? Or with a particular position in a company. Though it is our right to apply, but we are also going to be subjected to screening, to interview, to written examination, because it is already a philosophy that each company logically hires the best competent one. Though there was there could possibly times in which this particular policy would be bent. But anyways, anyhow, it is still the management prerogative of a company class. Okay? Then talking about the social aspect of human right, this refers the right to education. Why is that so? Because education, it is not only considered as a human right, but it is also part of our constitutional right. No, these rights class, these are internationally acknowledged, but these rights are also written in our constitution, and so it is also our constitutional rights. So you cannot be denied just because you have these tattoos, just because of this, you are differently able class. You cannot be denied by a certain educational institution just because of being this. Okay? Otherwise, that is tantamount to discrimination. Otherwise, any person can file a complaint against an educational institution that declines your admission without any legal, valid, reasonable ground class. Okay? So the right to health, if you notice, this is principally the reason why we are provided with public hospitals. Because obviously, not all Filipinos can afford to be hospitalized in a private hospital class. Knowing the massive fees entail with it, at least we have the option that if and when we cannot go to private hospitals, we can possibly avail the public hospital services of our country. Anyways, these services offered by different government institutions are actually the return of our taxes that we have contributed to the government. Okay? It's a cycle class. In every transaction that we do in the market, in every job that we have, there are always taxes, but with the assurance that these taxes remitted to the government will be given to us back in the form of expected quality services. Though there are several times in which we observe that there are discrepancies, there are malpractices with the government services. That's why it is crucial for us Filipinos to really vote whosoever that we think the most competent ones and the most deserving politicians to be placed in a particular position. Take note that midterm election is about to happen, class. Please conduct some good investigation to every candidate before we're gonna exercise our right to suffrage, class. Okay? I have to admit that there are, majority of the politicians, sad to say this, they are linked allegedly to many corruptions, class. I already mentioned to you in our previous discussion that the Congress, They have this, the MOE thing, but uh, just based on observation, class, it comes from the top down to the bottom. It has become allegedly an endemic in the Philippine, in our country, class. These massive corrupt practices. Okay? Again, Filipinos, we have the right to make this one stop by virtue of filing complaints or by selecting the more deserving, if not the most deserving politicians. Okay, class? Because we have this kind of government, democracy, the government that is for the people, by the people, and of the people. But sadly, most of us Filipinos are not aware on how to really scrutinize the qualifications because based on the existing qualifications for politicians, uh these are just so very low, no? In fact, the qualifications are are just so elementary and so basic. Example, able to read and write, and have been residing to a particular place for a determined year or years, class, no? Where in fact, if we apply for a job, we have to possess these units in tertiary education, or have possessed a baccalaureate degree, or there are even jobs that require us to get the master's degree or even the doctorate degree. But why is that so that politicians of this country, they have just so very low qualifications that anybody can just run, that anybody who is popular has an advantage to get the position just because during election times, his or her name can easily be recalled, remembered, and identified by the Filipinos, especially if an artista is running for for a political position, class. This is so alarming. I guess there's a need for the Congress to enact a law upgrading the qualifications. Otherwise, the Philippines rather remains doomed as what we are, and it will still be in the future. Okay? So collective rights. When we say collective rights, it refers to, okay, not rights which are not individual, meaning we all have this um uh collective unified rights, no? Just like the right to development. Plus, in the Philippines, we all have the right to development, to our transportation, to our infrastructure, to the quality educational services, to everything that the government has offered, class. Okay, we all have these rights. We all deserve to be given these quality services because these are our rights. These are our constitutional rights. The right to peace, as much as possible. We mentioned in the previous discussion that we must avoid any conflict. We must avoid any war because it will never be beneficial to Filipinos. That's why in the Constitution it is written that the Philippines has renounced any war and must work for peace and development, class. Okay? That's why with the recent developments of tensions in the West Philippine Sea, though there is a lot of agitations done by the Philippine media, done by different biased politicians just for us to be enraged, just for us to be vengeance and rage escalate the conflict with this West Philippine Sea. Plus, you as future educators, you have to be advocate for peace and order. You have to educate your would-be students that wars would never be good for everybody. Okay? So, a healthy environment. We have the right to a healthy ecology, class. That's why we have to protect the mother nature. Otherwise, mother nature instinctively returns the favor to us. If you notice this, students, the typhoons, which are birthed right there in the Pacific Oceans, as years pass by, as time turns the pages, its its strength, its magnitude, its gravity steadily increases, class, based on scientific inquiries, these are brought to us by the climate changes due to the distractions that we have done, that we human beings have caused to our environment. Okay? Little things that we do for the protection of the environment, that matters most, class. Because if everyone is heading towards the same direction, protecting the government, this will be beneficial not just for the Filipinos, for the people on earth, but for the succeeding future generation also of human beings. If we don't want to go instinct, class, we have to collectively help one another be heading to the same direction and protecting all of these um things that we have in our environment, maintain the balance, maintain the equilibrium to uphold a healthful ecology. Okay? Because these are collective rights. Even though it seems difficult, class, no, little actions can actually produce positive outcomes, no? So in our individual level, at least we do our part. Okay, class, we must not say to ourselves that there are plenty of my classmates who are not even segregating their trashes. They do not pick up the plastics. They just, you know, um, they just are not so careful in protecting the environment. So why should I? So having that kind of philosophy, having that kind of attitude, it will lead us to nothing. It will lead all of us instead to oblivion, class. Okay, we must help one another protecting the environment because this is our collective right. Okay, class. So principles of human rights. Later on, you shall be given to ask questions. You shall be given the opportunity to ask questions, class. Okay. So principles of human rights. First, universality, meaning human rights are applicable to all people. Indivisibility, the second one, means all human rights are interconnected and or are all equally important. Meaning, we could not say that we are Filipinos, we are Asians, our human rights are superior to other races' rights, to other nationalities' rights, because all of these rights are, again, equal and interconnected. We belong in the same planet, class. Third one, non-discrimination. Rights must be guaranteed without discrimination. Okay, discrimination is an outcome or result of our differences, class. Differences in religion, differences in worldviews, differences in the color of our skin, in our nationalities, in the upbringing that we have. Thousands of differences that we possess, class. Okay? So long as our actions do not encroach, do not breach a particular policy, regulation, or law, again, class, we must be entitled to our rights. We must not be discriminated. We must not be abandoned, unloved, and uncared for because these are just forms of discrimination. You cannot be denied for a particular job just because you're a gay, you're a lesbian, you have this disease. Otherwise, unless otherwise, there is a justifiable reason of non-admission or non-acceptance. In Philippine context, class, there are thousands of laws protecting Filipinos from discrimination. You as future educators have to be aware, have to be conscious, have to be advocates of this non-discrimination philosophy and policy, class, because these are part of our human rights. Now, talking about accountability, governments are accountable for respecting and upholding human rights. Obviously, class, okay? So the rights that we used to discuss, that we discussed previously, like the right to be heard before a competent court if there's a complaint filed against us, the right to due process, the right to health, the right to meet the witnesses face to face, talking about the rights of the accused. And there are thousands of rights written in the Constitution and all other special penal laws, class. We just have to be aware with this. So we can assert our rights and help also other people whose rights are trampled, are violated, are decimated. Okay? So the Bill of Rights in the Philippines Constitution, Philippine Constitution, we had discussed this previously. Can you just go over it again, class? But basically, this refers to the rights to life. We cannot be, just killed, because right now, even though convicted felons for grave offenses could not even face death penalty, because death penalty is already postponed and therefore cannot be enforced. Then the right to liberty, we have the right to travel, class, anywhere we want, anywhere at any time we go to any particular place in the Philippines or outside the country, so long as we comply with the necessary policies of the of the country that we are going to, of the embassy that we have to go through, class. Okay? The right to possess property. This is a right, class. Okay? You cannot be denied of your property without just compensation. If your property is being used by the government, you have to be given the right amount based on the appraised value of the property. Okay? Because the government also can exercise its power to, what power is that, class? The right of the government to impose that kind of power, wherein the government can take your property provided you are given the just compensation. What kind of power is that possessed by the government? Just a sort of review to our previous discussion.
Power of eminent domain, sir.
Perfect. Power of eminent domain. Next, freedom of speech. Class, take note of this. We all have the right to ventilate, voice out your concerns in the social media or to anywhere you want, so long as your speech are not libelous, so long as your speech belong to criticism, the category of criticism. How will you know that? Examine the elements of libel so that you will know when you will be crossing the line and you shall be held liable for libel. Okay? But basically, libel involves a malicious accusation imputing the dignity of a particular person, meaning you are just fabricating stories and lies just to indignate the person, just to put a blot on the person's name. And if the person gets offended and files a case, you could be liable for libel, and we cannot use this thing that this is part of free speech or the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression. You know what? This freedom of speech and expression is overly exercised by the media, and I do not like the proposal. I'm not in favor of the proposal that media will be exempted from libel. That is so insensical, illogical, and a bit idiotic, class. This libel thing should be and must be applicable to everybody, so we could be discernful with our comments. Okay? So class, do not be afraid to voice out your concerns if you have to in social media. It's okay. Again, the requirement is make it sure that what you are telling are facts. Okay? And make it sure that you are just doing the fair, constructive criticism. Next, the right to assembly. If you have decided to join a fraternity, if you have decided to join a union, an association, this is a constitutional right, not just a human right, but a constitutional right. We all have the right to do this. To join any assembly, to join any fraternity, association, organization, or whatsoever. Okay? Nobody can force us not to join. And in the same way, nobody can force us to join. Okay? Next, the right to privacy, class. So this entails a lot of things, the right to privacy, but let's just give the basic example. If there is this neighbor of yours, no, ang imuhang silingan has installed a CCTV camera wherein the eye of the camera directly focuses on your house or to all the passers-by of a particular place, that violates the right to data privacy, class. Any information of yours which are revealed by a certain person, of a certain entity, organization, company, without your written approval or consent, class, you can escalate your case to a proper judicial entity or court so that that practice would not be repeated again. We can assert our constitutional right, the right of privacy. Okay, that's why also in our respective homes and in our respective households, nobody can just enter without our permission. Otherwise, that can be a trespassing, class, because we are granted with this constitutional right, human right, the right to privacy. The right to due process and equal protection of law, we had already discussed this. We'll just proceed to the next slide. International human rights instruments. These are the international organizations that cooperate, that work with one another and coordinate with all of the countries, class, to really uphold these human rights as convened, as signed, as agreed by the different countries in every international conventions that that these countries have attended with. So these are the following human rights instrumentalities or organizations, class. First, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. But again, take note of this, class, not just against women, but against any person. Because you know what? We seem to have a narrow idea and tend to be narrow-sighted. When we talk about gender sensitivity, it is quite observable that there are people understand and construe this thing as empowering the rights of LGBT, the rights of women, the rights of children. What about the men? Talking about gender sensitivity, class, it refers to the rights of all people, regardless of gender that they have, regardless of sexual preference that they possess. Okay? So it's wrong to say this, that this gender sensitivity is only heavily enforceable by the members of LGBTQ plus blah blah blah, or by women only. Again, it includes also the rights of the men, okay, the rights of the children, and the rights of all individuals. Humans as we are, we're granted with these inalienable, universal human rights and constitutional rights. Again, please spread this philosophy, class, that gender sensitivity, it encompasses all rights of individuals, regardless of our differences, okay, and similarities. Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC also. So what are the rules of Commission on Human Rights? In the government, class, in the Philippines, we have this CHR, the Commission on Human Rights. What is the legal basis, by the way, of the existence of the CHR? CHR exists because it is in the Constitution. The birth of CHR is a mandate of the Constitution. And so we have the Commission on Human Rights. CHR functions the following: investigate human rights violations, monitors government compliance with human rights laws, promotes education and advocacy in human rights, and lastly, advises the government on human rights issues. To understand this better, class, we'll dissect, we'll analyze, criticize, and exercise our respective critical thinking just to get the finest insights of these examples. Number one, so famous, popular now because this Congress lately keeps on conducting the Quadcom committee, the in aid of legislation, investigate the alleged extrajudicial killings done by the former President Duterte way back the inclusive years from 2016 to year 2022. Okay, let's have a brief background. Since 2016, the Philippine government launched an aggressive anti-drug campaign known as the War on Drugs. Thousands of suspected drug users and dealers were allegedly killed by police or vigilantes. Vigilantes class, it refers to people, it refers to hard killers, okay? In exchange of money or any monetary, money or any form of reward. Okay? So with many killings being extrajudicial. When we say or killings done extrajudicially, meaning people are killed without being given the due process, without being granted the legal proceedings. Okay? Then allegedly, this drug, this war on drugs violated the following laws. First, the right to life. It is written in Article 3, Section 1 of the Philippine Constitution and Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Then the victims were not given a chance to defend themselves in court, which is a matter of constitutional and human right. And many also were allegedly killed without warrants or proper investigation. So the impact of this thing, United Nations, human rights groups, and other local advocates criticized the campaign for its lack of due process, rampant killings, and targeting the marginalized communities and people. Again, let me emphasize this class, that this is an alleged commission by the former administration, okay, Duterte administration. Meaning, if and when we also condemn Duterte that indeed he did, that the former President Duterte really committed these extrajudicial killings, we also likewise committed human rights violation, because these accusations class must be brought to proper competent court so that former President Duterte could face the charges. And if and when Duterte would be, after the trial, after the strenuous, public, speedy, impartial trial done by the court, if the court will find, based on the evidences, that indeed Duterte is guilty of this extrajudicial killing, at least Duterte would be facing the penalty, the imprisonment, and whatever civil and civil damages that could be imposable upon to him. But again, Duterte also is entitled to due process. But you know what? Let me give you my take on this. If I were this Congress, if I were this competent, honorable congressmen, members of the Quadcom committee and the senators, the proper place to file a case for an alleged commission of Duterte of these extrajudicial killings due to the war on drugs, that should be brought to court. Because court, as we know it, they try the accused, okay, based on the presented evidences by the prosecution and the defense side, okay? Because through filing of cases to court, the accused is given the right to due process, and at the same time, the alleged victims were also given the proper avenue. Because right there in Quadcom committee, in Congress or Senate class, these are just shows in aid of legislation. They could not prosecute the cases. They could not ask the people to really present the evidences, because these are just so side sweeping, and they eventually have this sweeping general conclusions class. And in fact, the time is just so short for them to conduct so. And worst thing, based on observation, there are plenty of resource speakers who are not given the chance to elaborate. There are these members of Congress in a certain committee who impose like this, that Mr. Resource Speaker, you are lying. Mr. Resource Speaker, you are not telling to us the truths. And if you continuously doing so, we can declare you in contempt. What the heck is that class? It seems to be that the resource speakers, the invited witnesses, are not allowed to elaborate, are not allowed to say things according to their perceptions and according to the truths that they claim. This Congress seems to become a very authoritative Congress class, that if you keep on insisting that these are the things that you think that somebody thinks are the facts, and if the Congress do not or does not like the answer, eventually Congress would tell that you are in contempt. Is that correct, class? I guess there is a particular right violated again by this Congress. I maintain the stance, class, that all complaints cases must be filed in court so that the judge would be able to determine whether or not the accusation is indeed real, factual. And if it is factual, then let the fang of the law take its course and penalize the accused. Simple as that. This power of Congress to conduct investigation in aid of legislation is overly exercised. There is an abuse, class. There has to be a remedy. I mean, the people has to point this out. I'm not saying that I am not in favor of that the things that they are doing, conducting the investigation. I'm just trying to emphasize the the most appropriate place to conduct the investigation and determine the guilt of the accused and the innocence or the guilt or innocence of the accused is right there in court, so that proper penalty can be imposed, and this accused who after the due process will be determined to be guilty of the charges filed against him, at least this accused would be imprisoned. This accused will be called as convicted person and be serving the sentence to any penal rehabilitation centers, class. Di ba? That makes sense, because that must be the way, and that is the job of judicial branch. There are some allegations done by a lot of political analysts that these members of Congress are just trying to, to perfume themselves, knowing that the midterm election is fast approaching. Due to the media mileage, due to the constant coverage of the media, these Quadcom committees tend to become more famous and famous and famous. You get what I mean? Okay? So next case, class. Let me wrap up. So this alleged extrajudicial killing, for me, there has to be a complaint to be filed in court against the former President Duterte. And I am not in favor of just doing this Quadcom committee, Senate Blue Ribbon investigation and aid of legislation. These are just redundancy. These are just leading nowhere, class. It wastes people's taxes. Okay? If they think that there are concrete evidences, let these evidences be presented in court. That's the most appropriate thing, so that President Duterte could be penalized, could be liable if found guilty beyond reasonable doubt. That's it. Okay? Next, the forced displacement of indigenous peoples in Mindanao. Background. Indigenous people in Mindanao have long been displaced from their ancestral lands due to mini mining activities. This is so disheartening and very awful to hear, but my God, ladies and gentlemen, this has been occurring in our this has been occurring to a lot of places in Mindanao, and millions of people get affected, class, to this forced displacement of indigenous peoples. The mining activities, the militarization, the armed conflict between the government forces and the insurgent groups. Insurgent groups refers to MILF, MNLF, the CPP, and PA, and all others. So many were forced to leave their respective homes, and often without prior consultation or compensation. Something like these indigenous peoples are forced to leave their lands, their respective residences, because of these incidences, of these identified mining activities, militarization, and armed conflict, class. When I conducted my study about the Bajaus, you know what? The Bajau people class who are now dispersed across Philippine archipelago in Cebu City. We have these Bajaus living in Barangay Mambaling. I had interviewed them for several times due to the free research that I created and I published. This is confirmed by them that they used to be living in Mindanao, but because there were also people who robbed them, tulison sila class, kawatan sila. Imagine that. Wala, I mean, they do not have the material possessions. And yet, their only possession, which is the pump boat, still is being taken away from them. Okay? I mean, Bajaus are called as sea nomads. They do not have the permanent address. What they love to do is just to do fishing so they could have put respective foods on their tables class, and yet they are treated like that by our fellow beloved countrymen who just keep on thinking their vested personal interest, not minding the plights, the experiences of these highly discriminated indigenous groups of people that we have in the Philippines. Sadly, class. Okay? So alleged human rights violation, this is a violation of the right of property, as cited in Article 3, Section 1 of the Philippine Constitution, the right of self-determination and cultural integrity, as recognized under special law, called as the People's Rights Act of 1997 or the Republic Act number 8371. Forced displacement also violates international standards on indigenous rights, such as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or the UNDRIP. So the impact of this class, displacement disrupted the nomad communities or the indigenous people way of life. And it will have the following outcomes: loss of livelihood. They will not be able to access education. Their cultural practices would be disrupted. And they would be displaced totally and will continue to face obstacles, massive challenges, and difficulties in accessing basic services and protection. Kindly imagine and let this situation be so immersing to everyone, class. Think of this. These people have been so lowly. These people have been so in difficult moments in their lives. And yet, a simple upliftment would be so beneficial to them, and yet they are just treated like this by none other than our fellow countrymen. Okay? It's so disheartening, it's so sad, it's so frustrating to hear these experiences of our nomads, of our indigenous communities. That's why we, class, as educators, as social studies teachers, we have to be advocating, we have to spread the words that these true-blooded descendants of our clan, of our race need help. They badly need basic services. They badly need the assistance of the government and from all people so they could be able to overcome these challenges that they have been facing for so many decades already, class, if not century. Okay? And it is appreciated, class, that you will be having this activity, right? Wherein you feature the different groups of indigenous communities that they have this kind of culture, showcasing their cultural practices and the information about them. This is totally plausible. This is so good to the indigenous communities, class. So just keep on, let us keep on advocating. Let us keep on upholding these rights, the rights of these indigenous people, and spreading that we have these precious, beloved Filipinos that need our protection, that need the preservation of their cultural practices, and need, furthermore, the socio-economic upliftment of their daily living so they could also be reaching the respective goals in life, class. Okay? Now, the third example of alleged human rights violation, arbitrary detention and torture of different activists. Background. Human rights activists, environmental defenders, and government critics have often been subjected to harassment, arbitrary detention, and torture under the guise of anti-terrorism or rebellion charges. In many cases, fabricated charges or planted evidences have been reported to silence dissent. Okay, it emphasizes that these actions violate the right to due process, the right to protection from arbitrary detention, and the protection from torture as indicated with this Republic Act number 9745. The impact is arbitrary detention and torture severely undermine the rule of law and contribute to a climate of fear. This has a chilling effect to all activists, and it curtails furthermore the freedom of speech, the expression, and many people are afraid to speak out against injustices because we are afraid to be just abducted and will just disappear eventually. Okay? It happens, class, during the time of former President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. There are thousands of allegations that plenty of the activists disappeared suddenly. That's why there was a climate of fear, and it had a chilling effect to different Filipinos at that time. But again, I emphasize that this remains an allegation because there were no cases filed against the Marcos Ferdinand Sr. to a proper court, and Marcos Sr. was not convicted of anything. In the first place, there were no complaints filed against him. But there has been allegations relative to this arbitrary detention, torture of the different activists who voice out their concerns, injustices, abuses of the martial law, of the corrupt practices of Marcos Sr., and so on. And this, kindly try to analyze, class. If we people do not take action, if we do not file complaints to court to a certain person who abuses his power, there could be no changes. There could be, we could not expect for any significant development because we just remain so passive. We just remain so inactive. We just let all of these abuses pass by. So partly, class, technically, we could also be blamed for not doing anything to any abuses done by any public official or employee, class. Okay? So in order for an allegation to be determined its authenticity and truthfulness, we have to escalate and file charges right there in court to a particular individual who exercises his or her power beyond the limit of the law. So, class, to have this takeaway, human rights are essential to ensure dignity, equality, and justice in our society. That's why the Bill of Rights are written in the Constitution, and this Bill of Rights are in congruence, in consonance, in parallel with the different international covenants and instruments that shape the rights, that shapes the human rights protection in the Philippines. Then we have to acknowledge also the Commission on Human Rights plays a vital role in safeguarding the rights, these human rights, these constitutional rights, promoting accountability of the government and to any powerful individual or any person who exercises, abuses, and violates the rights, the human rights and the constitutional rights and other rights granted to us by the special penal laws, class. Okay?